Welcome and hello. I'm Erica Serino, Communications Manager at Plastic Pollution Coalition. Thank you for joining our April webinar. This is your brain on plastic, what you need to know about plastics and health. I brought to share, just as a brief aside, this is some microplastic gathered from Camilo Point in Hawaii, but just some visualization as you listen in tonight or today, depending on where you are. This is what microplastic looks like. This is in our bodies, it's in our brains, and it is affecting our health. So we're going to learn from our excellent panelists all about this issue tonight. Plastic Pollution Coalition is a nonprofit communications and advocacy organization that collaborates with an expansive global alliance of organizations, businesses, and individuals to create a more just, equitable, and regenerative world free of plastic pollution and its toxic impacts. Today, we have 4 poll questions, and to get a sense of who is joining us, we will ask them, and each question will only appear for about 20 seconds, so please answer quickly. Poll question number 1, where are you joining us from today? Thank you for sharing your responses. Lots of people in North America, but also other parts of the world, Africa and Europe and North Asia. It's great. Our second poll question is, what best describes the area of focus of your work? Please select one of these areas. We have a lot of different representation here today. Excellent. Thank you. And our next question, where have you heard about reports on microplastics and health recently? You can select all that apply. Lots of news out there across all different formats and in person as well, it seems. It's really helpful to get a sense of where folks are hearing about this. And our next question is, plastics have been linked to which of the following health issues? Please select all that apply. Unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of responses on all of these health issues. The answer to that really is all of the above. Not that this was quizzing you, but it's very helpful to understand where you're coming from tonight so we can weigh in. Thank you very much for participating in our poll questions. Unfortunately, one of our planned panelists, Dr. Shauna Swan, had a last-minute issue and is unable to join us today. So Dr. Manasa Mantravadi will be taking her place as a panelist. Manasa will be joining Amina Tariq Sidibe and Zaya Tong, and I will be moderating the conversation. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our first panelist, Dr. Manasa Mantravadi. Dr. Manasa Mantravadi is the visionary founder of Ahimsa and the Conscious Cafeteria program, dedicated to transforming our food system into a safer, healthier, and more sustainable foundation for generations to come. She is a practicing pediatrician and mother who is leading the shift from single-use, heat-and-serve school lunches to nourishing, sustainable models built on reusable foodware and scratch cooking, restoring value and integrity to school meals. Welcome, Manasa.
Thank you so much for having me. It's also evening where I am. So good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everyone. So I am here to really talk about, I think some people may think that this is your brain on plastic. And while we know that we have seen microplastic in all organs, including the brain, I think today's gathering is really getting the information into your brain about plastic. So my job here is to educate and empower you on health choices and how plastic can affect those health choices. So I am a pediatrician, but I created a line of stainless steel dishware for home and for schools because the majority of dishware for kids, unfortunately, is plastic. And the American Academy of Pediatrics, it's a group of 67,000 pediatricians, made a formal recommendation in 2018 to avoid using plastic because of the health concerns and to use glass or stainless steel. So I kind of took my knowledge of medicine and roots in India, where we use stainless steel pretty commonly, and merged the two to create a line and a solution for plastic in the kitchen and on the dining table and school lunchroom. So that's how I kind of got into this world of preventative medicine through preventing the toxicity in the environment. So when we really think about health in America, our American healthcare system is kind of designed to treat disease as opposed to prevent it. But really what we know now is there's a whole field of environmental health medicine that's pretty prominent in, especially in pediatrics. And so really understanding that the intersection of the planet and human health is real, and the impact of both of those shape each other. So this field of environmental health is becoming a top priority. As many people know, the American Academy of Pediatrics was only one of many medical organizations to really pull up that red flag on plastic being harmful to human health. And so 2018, they really talked about children's health, but even prior to that and after that, you've got the Endocrine Society, the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology. So you have all these growing global medical organizations saying that the chemicals in plastic and the plastic that we are exposed to is actually impacting our health negatively, and we're seeing an epidemic rise of diseases that we just simply didn't see before. And so when you think about it, it's like, okay, well, how is this happening? Because plastic, it's like invisible, right? When for those of us who were back in the 80s and 90s, you saw that "This is your brain on drugs" kind of campaign, right? There was the egg and you could see it, or you might have seen the smoking, and then that black tar lung. It was very visual. You could kind of just like see it, and you could connect the two. Well, plastic is not that way, right? We don't consume it, we don't wear it and then breathe it, and then suddenly something happens that's physical that you can see. And so it's silent, it's changing the way that our body is supposed to act. And so it's hard to visualize in that same way. But what we see is when we study the population, there are really big changes that are happening in our body. Why, right? It's this silent thing that's everywhere. It's everywhere. So when we see population changes of this many health outcomes that are related to something, it's, genetics doesn't change in a generation, but our environment can. So if you look around at the sources of plastic, everyday products, children's products are all made out of plastic. Their toys, their bottles, their dishware, exposures through the air, the water that we drink. And so it's this constant exposure, even at low levels, to these chemicals, to these particles that we are breathing through contaminated air, that we are ingesting through contaminated water, food, and that is kind of integrating through dermal contact. So our clothing even is laced with plastic. So these are different exposures that we get. And what it ultimately leads to is, many people have our endocrine disrupting chemicals. That is certainly one thing that we see, but also heart disease, lung issues, cancers, neurological effects, especially in children. And so these are real things because we've been exposed to it constantly for long enough that it's changing human health outcomes. So many of you might have seen this, how much plastic, microplastic, that we are consuming. A spoonful every week, a bowlful every month, and a plateful of microplastic every year. So, it doesn't biodegrade. It's accumulating inside our body. And there's two ways that plastic affects us. One is particles, which is microplastics and nanoplastic, and the other is the plastic chemicals. So we get a 2-for-1. So it's not just the chemicals, but it's also the particles. And here we will see that microplastic, this is a very busy slide, but all it is meant to show you is that what we know about microplastic and nanoplastic, and I think a lot of people have heard, is, hey, it's in every organ that we're seeing. We are seeing microplastic, these little tiny particles, in almost every part of our body, right? And you find it in placenta, it's crossing the placenta barrier, it's crossing the blood-brain barrier. What we don't know, we have some hypothesis on all the different things that can happen. It hasn't been studied enough on the exact mechanism. But we know it's affecting. We see rates of colon cancer rising in young adults. We see, again, trends, but this is kind of newer, but we know it's accumulating in our organs and that we need to study it more to understand the exact mechanism. Now, the next slide will tell you the plastic chemicals on the other hand. So remember, plastic, we can think about it as harmful from a particle perspective. It's in all of our organs. We're still studying the exact mechanism of how it's affecting us. And then we've got the chemicals that make up the plastic, the chemicals that make plastic moldable and hard and doesn't degrade. All the things that make it really convenient and cheap are all the same chemicals that interfere. This we do know. So we also can see that it's in the urine, in the blood. And here we actually know that we call them endocrine disrupting chemicals because basically they look like your hormones. Endocrine is another word for hormone. And so, your hormone system is designed for you to go through different stages. So your thyroid, your ovaries, your pancreas secretes insulin. It's a series of organs and hormones that kind of keep us healthy. It's really important for children because they are growing and developing these organs, and they're going through puberty at certain times. They're going through bone health at certain times. These plastic chemicals look like those hormones, and it disrupts that normal pattern. And what we end up seeing, and this is kind of the bulk of what you see, is the next slide. You really start to see shifts, right? So you start to see development issues. You start to see obesity rise. If you go to the next slide, parents are becoming more aware of this, but how it's happening is you see epidemic rises. So if you look at this, before, when we were serving children kind of fresh food, not with plastic and not on plastic trays, we didn't really have a whole lot of childhood obesity, right? We didn't have a whole lot of childhood type 2 diabetes, which was basically non-existent. And now it's an epidemic rise. And so what you can see is when we went from a cooking at school to a single-use heat and serve ultra-processed plastic food for our children, you see what happens to their bodies. And so we see morbid obesity in children like we've never seen before. You see changes in puberty that we've never seen before. We're seeing children as young as 6 start to go through puberty. You're seeing huge rises in ADHD and neurocognitive disabilities. So these are all, you don't have to go to medical school or be a scientist to understand that when we're introducing plastic kind of in every part of our being, we are also starting to see big, huge health trends. And again, genetics does not change in a generation, but environmental exposure does. I think that whenever I talk, it can feel really scary because it's real science, and these chemicals are in our organs. They are in our bloodstream. They are affecting normal development. They are affecting our cells at a level that can, change the course of how cancer develops in our body. That's all scary. However, I want to give everybody hope at the end, which is when we start to decrease the exposure of these plastic chemicals, of these plastic particles, there are really good results, and so we can see those levels of BPA phthalates decrease in as little as 3 to 5 days sometimes. So that should be hopeful. And so I think that a lot of times we hear, this is horrible, I can't do anything about it, it's in my body forever. And I'm here to tell you, whatever little thing you can do is going to help your children, yourself, your parents making better decisions and impacting your body. So if you go to the next slide, I think it's the last one. My goal as a pediatrician outside of the clinic walls is to essentially take this horrible, horrible velocity that's going up and just shift it back down. And how do we do that? We make better choices at home. We advocate for policies and better regulation so these chemicals are not even in circulation for our growing children. And the hope is that kind of these small changes lead to big impact. So I just want to leave with hope for the planet that we're going to leave behind for these kids, and certainly for the health of generations to come. So thank you. Thank you so very much for having me today.
Thank you, Manasa. That was really excellent, and appreciate the hopeful note at the end there. Next, I'd like to introduce Amina Tariq Sidibe. Amina Tariq Sidibe is a policy expert and sustainability advocate dedicated to tackling the global plastic crisis at earthday.org. Amina works on initiatives that expose the environmental and health impacts of plastic pollution, advance sustainable policies, and drive corporate and governmental accountability. With a background in sustainability, communications, and environmental justice, Amina specializes in making complex issues accessible to the public through storytelling and data-driven insights. Welcome, Amina.
Thank you so much, Erica, and good evening, everyone. Today, I will be giving a brief overview of the health impacts of plastics, how we got here, and some important solutions. But first, I want to introduce Earth Day. Earthday.org is a global nonprofit organization dedicated to diversifying, educating, and activating the environmental movement worldwide. Originating from the first Earth Day in 1970, it has grown to collaborate with over 150,000 partners across 192 countries, mobilizing more than 1 billion people annually to advocate for environmental protection. The organization spearheads initiatives including climate and environmental literacy programs, reforestation efforts through the Canopy Project, and campaigns like End Plastics aimed at reducing plastic pollution. Earth Day is also right around the corner on April 22nd, and on our website, you can find a map of activities on and around Earth Day in your area, and I encourage you to check it out. So for a quick review, plastics are introduced into the environment as primary microplastics that are intentionally manufactured to be small, like microbeads or plastic pellets, or they enter as secondary microplastics, which are created when larger plastic items, like packaging, break down over time and enter the environment through manufacturing, consumer use, and waste management. Nanoplastics are even smaller, and they're tiny enough to pass through the human blood-brain barrier. The primary way humans are exposed to microplastics is through inhalation, because microplastics are in our air, especially indoors from dust, textiles, and packaging. And humans are also exposed by ingestion, because microplastics are in our food, like seafood, table salt, fruits, veggies, and bottled and tap water. And as Dr. Manassa touched on, plastics have been found in 8 out of our 12 major human organs, like our brain, heart, lungs, and reproductive systems. The plastic particles and the chemicals they leach, like bisphenol A, phthalates, and flame retardants, have been linked to a slew of health issues, including endocrine disruption, cancer risks, fertility issues, and immune problems. These tiny particles are also said to cause inflammation, oxidative stress, and enter cell membranes. Though full health impacts are still being studied, children, pregnant women, and low-income communities are going to be especially at risk of these impacts. So let's talk about the main problem, the production of plastic. Over 9.2 billion metric tons of plastics have been produced since the 1950s. And to put that into perspective, that's more plastic than the weight of 1 billion elephants or 25,000 Empire State Buildings. And it's enough plastic to wrap the entire Earth in plastic cling film. Plus, the annual production of plastic has grown exponentially, with 413.8 million metric tons of plastic produced globally in 2023. But although 30% of plastics ever created are still in use, almost 40% were made just for single use. And that means they're probably just used for minutes. So what does all that plastic production leave us with? A whole lot of trash. We cannot recycle our way out of this crisis, period. Only 9% of plastics ever produced have been recycled, while 19% has been incinerated, 22% has been mismanaged, and 49% has been landfilled. So what does that mean? It means that for every plastic bottle we think we're recycling, there are 5 more sitting in landfills, 2 burning into toxic air, and 2 leaking into our rivers, oceans, and soils. So recycling is like a Band-Aid, not the cure. And it was never designed to keep up with the sheer volume of plastic that we're producing. And in fact, plastic production is set to triple by 2060 if we don't intervene. And the truth is, the system is working exactly as it was built, to prioritize profit, convenience, and disposability, not sustainability, safety, or justice. Before we look at the solutions, we should, as consumers, know how we got here. And when we think about our brains on plastics, it's not just the chemicals and the particles, it's the misleading information that has been fed to us. This was not an accident, it was engineered. In the 1950s, plastics were sold as a miracle material, lightweight, cheap, and durable. And it was really helpful. But the last part, the durable, that's the problem, because plastics never go away. And as the mountain of plastic waste begins to grow, so did public concern. And instead of slowing down production or investing in real solutions, the plastic and fossil fuel industries launched one of the most successful PR campaigns in modern history. They told us, don't worry, plastic is recyclable. And then they pushed the burden of responsibility onto individuals to recycle more, sort better, buy greener. Meanwhile, they lobbied behind closed doors to block bans, delay regulation, and greenwash their image with misleading claims. They created feel-good campaigns to make consumers feel guilty instead of corporations feel accountable. And it worked. As a result, we have a system built to produce more and manage less. But the good news is that there's still some strong solutions for the plastic crisis. We need to cut plastic production at its source. That means eliminating unnecessary packaging and redesigning products to be safe, durable, and truly circular without toxic chemicals or planned obsolescence. We must shift away from single use towards a system that allows for reuse, refill, and return. Think refillable beverage bottles, reusable takeout containers, and bulk dispensers. These solutions are not futuristic. They're practical, proven, and scalable. We also support innovation in materials that are non-toxic, compostable, and actually recyclable. And we should stop labeling plastics as biodegradable when they're not. Real solutions need real standards. Finally, we need strong, enforceable global rules, starting with the UN Global Plastics Treaty, because voluntary pledges won't cut it. We need to build binding agreements to cap production, phase out toxic chemicals, and hold polluters accountable. When it comes to health, we should ban the most harmful chemicals found in plastics, like BPA, phthalates, PFAS, styrene, and require full transparency from manufacturers. We need to redesign everyday products with safety in mind, from baby bottles to food containers to clothing. And that means choosing materials that are non-toxic, durable, and free of hormone-disrupting chemicals. And then we need to invest in long-term research to understand how plastics are affecting our bodies. If microplastics are in our blood, our lungs, and even breast milk, we need to know what that means and how to stop it. I will stop there. Thank you so much for everyone doing the hard work.
Thank you, Amina. That was very enlightening and appreciate the discussion of solutions there. Now I would like to introduce our final panelist, Zaya Tang. Zaya Tang is an award-winning broadcaster, best known as the anchor of Daily Planet, Discovery Channel's flagship science program. Her book, The Reality Bubble, was shortlisted for the prestigious RBC Taylor Prize in 2020 and won the Lane Anderson Prize for Best Science Writing in Canada. Zaya's latest film, Plastic People, The Hidden Crisis of Microplastics, premiered at South by Southwest, where it was selected as a top 10 staff favorite and profiled for its groundbreaking findings in the New York Times. Welcome, Zaya.
Thank you, everybody. It is wonderful to be here with you all, and great to have and be able to see so many concerned citizens when it comes to plastic. As Erica just mentioned, my latest film is Plastic People, The Hidden Crisis of Microplastics. And I tend to describe this film as Barbie, the horror movie. And essentially in this film, I traveled around the world and had the opportunity to meet with leading microplastics researchers to look at the impacts of microplastics on human health. And as Erica mentioned as well, the reason the film is so groundbreaking is because we followed a team in Turkey, and we're the very first in the world to document plastics found in the human brain on a live human subject. We also traveled and met with scientists and researchers who were looking at plastic in the human placenta as well as human lungs. And as for myself, I put my own body to the test, and I ended up testing my own blood as well as my own feces on camera, which I have to tell you is incredibly unglamorous. So I thought also, just to give you a sense of why we felt as filmmakers that it was really important to make this film at this time. And critical to this issue of plastics is the fact that we're dealing with an invisible threat, and it is a twin threat that comes from the same cause. So if you look at the climate crisis and the microplastics crisis, they are flip sides of the same coin. And that is because you can't see the carbon dioxide coming out of buildings, you can't see it coming out of tailpipes, in the same way you cannot see the microplastics that we are all inhaling at this very moment. But they have one united cause, and that is, of course, the oil and gas industry, which is responsible for both of those things, which are causing a huge crisis to human beings and all the other living beings on the planet. So I think it's really important for us to also recognize that this is a human health threat, but this is also a threat that is affecting many other species on our planet as well. And so with that, I thought we could roll the trailer and give you guys a sense of the journey that I had an opportunity to go on, and I look forward to answering any questions afterwards as well.
Microplastics are possibly the most serious type of pollutant that our society has ever created.
I tested snow in our backyard and found tiny fragments of plastic particles. When I came home, I told my children to not catch snowflakes. It's everywhere. Go out into the world and you're going to be exposed to it.
Plasticizers have been implicated in various health problems: heart disease, diabetes, obesity, cancer, fertility problems.
We're finding microplastics wherever we look in the human body.
We know that humanity is getting sicker. I don't know if there's a direct connection or not, but it's something I want to find out.
This is the shit that I do for science, literally.
I think everybody has microplastics in their body.
Yes.
Oh, everybody.
So like this fiber that we saw here, polyester.
I asked the doctor, I said, how come I can't remember my child growing up? Apparently, she said, that's when you got hit with high doses of benzene.
Plastic is like the embodiment of capitalism. It made possible the material world that we live in now. They are the bones, the skin, the connective tissue.
Virtually every molecule of plastic ever created still exists somewhere on Earth. The plastic never disappears, it just breaks down into tinier and tinier particles.
Is this soil or plastic? Plastic soil. We are producing poisonous food. We are poisoning ourselves with our hand. Yeah, look.
Was that plastic? I'm still processing the fact that this stuff is really in my body.
This is the story of a new world. A world that begins in the mysterious and invisible universe of atoms and molecules.
And so I'm happy to direct any of you to the fine folks at White Pine who also can help you organize community screenings if that is of interest as well. That's one way that we found really helpful in educating the public.
Awesome. Thank you, Zaya. Now we're going to move on to the discussion part of our panel. I'll start by asking our panelists some questions submitted by attendees ahead of time. Please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A feature, and we'll do our best to answer them live. I do see that it's been a very active Q&A, which is great. And now we will consult our expert panelists. This goes to Manasa. How does drinking out of plastic, such as cups, bottles, and plates, and eating out of plastic affect our bodies?
In general, I think we discussed the different ways that we are exposed to plastic. And in this one, it's the ingestion portion. So plastic cups and plates, all of those are made from these plastic chemicals. So bisphenol, phthalates, and one point of confusion, a lot of people think BPA-free plastic is safe plastic. It is not. It is a group or a family of chemicals called bisphenols. So a lot of the substitutes like the BPS, BPT, you just pick a letter and that those are just as harmful, if not even more harmful than BPA. Just that one got the bad rap for baby bottles. And so that's the marketing term. But so the exposure is through truly the migration of these chemicals from the product into the food or into the drink that we are consuming. It is happening at baseline. A lot of people might think, oh, I don't put my plastic in the dishwasher, it's okay. Oh, I don't put my plastic in the microwave, it's okay. So these are leaching and migrating at baseline. It's happening. Heat will exponentially and make that happen faster and to a larger degree. So the notion that it's okay to use it as long as you don't have heat is inaccurate. However, that being said, if you don't have other products to feed your child out of or in your school and you must use it, the American Academy of Pediatrics says if you must use plastic, please don't, expose it to heat. And so I think there's what should we do and what can we do? And I always say try to make the choices that are best for yourself and your family.
Thank you for that. Super helpful. And yeah, once you go down the chemical rabbit hole, it seems like it's never ending, unfortunately. Excellent. Okay, I would like to direct this question at Amina. Where can we find more free resources to equip teachers and teach students about microplastics and plastic pollution?
I think this is a great plug for earthday.org. Earth Day has a climate education program that provides a lot of free toolkits for educators, students, and parents to be able to discuss the health impacts of plastics and possible solutions that you can do at home at an individual level. And then also you can advocate for locally in terms of policy, nationally, and globally. And I think those resources are a great starting point for people who don't really know too much about plastic health impacts because they break it down into very simple terms. So I encourage you guys to check out earthday.org. On our website, we'll find a lot of toolkits with all this helpful information for teachers and students.
And Erica, a quick plug on that too. Actually, PPC, Plastic Pollution Coalition, and AHIMSA, company, developed a really awesome curriculum with the Smurfs. It's a little story, and you can find that on ahimsaschools.com. It's completely free, so any parent can use it at home, K through 2, or teachers can use it as well. So that's just something that we did together, which was a fun little project to do.
I'll hop in on this one too, actually, if I might. Plastic People, if you go to plasticpeopledoc.com and head to education, we also developed a curriculum for grades 7 to 12. So it's multi-day units or individual lesson plans. And it covers everything from the Global Plastics Treaty to oil company accountability, microplastics in human health, toxic homes, waste colonialism, and even rebellion. So I would ask any teachers or people who are interested in that to check that out.
All excellent. Thank you so much, all of you. The next question I would like to direct towards Zaya, because this is a media type question, and one that I've been asked as well. So do you foresee a warning label being required on plastics that come into direct contact with food or beverages, such as plastic straws, cutlery, takeout packaging, and other food containers?
I think it's a really good idea, and it's a smart idea for a specific reason. And that's because one of the questions I'm asked most often is, how come we have plastic wrapping on cucumbers? Why do we have plastic wrapping on oranges or tomatoes, things that nature developed with a skin? And the reason is the majority of food packaging exists on these sorts of products for branding. That's all it exists for. It's not really there to protect your produce, right? So yes, I think we absolutely need to flip the script on that. And so if we have warning labels to counter all this advertising, then hopefully we can start to phase it out. Because of course we don't need that plastic in the first place. My grandmothers did not grow up with all of that plastic on their cucumbers or on their fruit or in veggies. And I think it's really important to be able to hack that plastic packaging and warn people about it.
To Zaya's point about the misleading current existing symbols, one example on my slides showed the RIC symbol that you'll commonly see on plastic packaging with a little triangle and then a number on the inside. That symbol does not mean it's recyclable. That symbol was stolen from the paper recycling symbol in the 1980s, and then used to kind of mislead consumers into thinking that because there's a triangle with a number on their packaging, it's recyclable, but that's not true. And typically the only recyclable plastics are type 1 and type 2, and the other remaining 5 types of plastics are rarely ever recycled. So those are those tricks by the plastic industry to kind of mislead consumers.
Thanks for adding that. Also very important to take note about these tactics that the industry have used to deceive and distract from real solutions. And to that end, I would like to ask a question, and I'll open up to all the panelists about recycling. I saw a question in the chat that said, is it better to use recycled plastic? Like, is there any benefit to that? So would anyone want to jump in and answer that question?
I can say that one of the things that we looked into, but that we didn't delve into too deeply in the film, is just because you only have an hour and 20 minutes, is really the impact on the health of recycling workers. Because if you're working at a recycling plant to recycle plastic into other products, you are inhaling just an incredible amount of microplastics. They've found really heightened levels in the wastewater streams and in the air coming from those recycling factories. So it's one of those unspoken things that we don't talk about. We also did work with and speak to waste pickers when we were in the Philippines, and these are the folks that are collecting all of that plastic waste. It's a very important job that they have, but fundamentally the health impacts that they suffer directly from being in close proximity to very dirty plastics and coming across all those shards and inhaling them is also really detrimental. So really, I think at that starting point of what happens when we're recycling, because when you're taking those plastics, you're breaking them down mechanically into smaller and smaller pieces as it is. So you're just creating a ton of microplastics.
And I think too, to piggyback off of that, is just understanding really the life cycle of plastic and the health harm and environmental harm at each stage. And I think that's really important when we explain this to the masses, right? Because I think most people think, oh, it's the plastic straw, or again, humans think in these tangible ways. And so you don't think about, oh, well, how is it made? How is it disposed? How is it recycled? And what are the implications on the health of not just me, but those workers, and then the community that lives in that area, right? And so at each age and stage of plastic, there are real health harms and environmental harms.
And just to add what you said, Manasa, as well, is that ultimately the raw truth of the matter is that when you have a recycled plastic products can only be recycled a couple times anyway, and most of them don't get recycled into new products, but those products all still end up ultimately in landfill.
I was going to say that same point. Plastics can only be recycled up to 1 to 2 times before it's either incinerated, turned to back to fossil fuels by waste energy incineration, or ultimately end up in a landfill. But I will say, even though I don't personally advocate for recycling as a solution, recycled plastics are still better. They reduce the demand for fossil fuels for new virgin plastics to be made. They lower the carbon emissions for producing recycled plastics. And they keep plastics out of the landfill and ocean. So when you're able to use your consumer power to support a circular economy, it does make an impact, but it can't be the only solution.
We got another question in the chat that I think would resonate with many. We live in a busy society, and many of us need access to fast food, such as frozen meals. What would you recommend the frozen foods industry package microwavable meals in that would be safe and sustainable? And I'll leave this to everyone, but especially to Manasa.
That's a really hard question because one of my areas of focus is environmental health, and the other is in culinary medicine, because those really intersect at the preventative form of medicine, as opposed to me having to give, children metformin and, and treat them for their kind of diet-related diseases. So, yes, the plastic industry has made it so easy to just to do this, right? To have prepackaged meals. And so when I think about it, the best case scenario is when we look at whole foods, right? Like real whole foods. When you look at time studies and culinary medicine breaking down the barriers of time, cost, and skills, there are actually ways to really still, in a busy modern world, eat whole foods in a way that you don't have to resort to it. So if you are going to kind of prepackage your meals, I definitely don't advocate for microwaving the plastic. Although, by the way, in medical school, I did it all the time before I knew. So this is not like I'm some guru and have not made mistakes in the past. But I would say limit it. So as opposed to, it's like, what's the packaging that I can use? The truth is, these big companies don't have a choice. Like, I'm a small company and I don't have a choice because they don't exist, right? So in order to scale, you have to be able to package things that don't break, that are cheap and cost effective, and that is truly kind of plastic. So can you have those foods from time to time? Yes. Could you decrease the exposure to it? Instead of having it 5 days a week, maybe have it 3 days a week or 2 days a week, and try to do something else that still is cost effective and time effective. So that would be my answer, because I don't think that there are great scalable answers yet to your question. I wish there were, and I work with a lot of companies for advice, and that's always what they say. I can't do it at scale. Like these food companies, they can't do it at scale yet. So we got to unfortunately make some consumer choices from time to time, sadly.
That's helpful. As a mom myself, I have been looking at the baby food industry, and this is a very small tangent, so I hope it helps people. But I just basically blend whole foods, fruits, vegetables at this time, and I have my nice ahimsa kit that I use to serve and to allow my little one to explore. And it does not take that much extra time. I mean, compared to everything else we're busy with in our days, so I can attest to that. But our next question, so how do you separate out the effects of other possible chemicals and the environment and poor diet or stress or no exercise, pathogens? There are many things that could make us ill, right? How do we isolate the effects of microplastics and plastic chemicals? Are there any studies that could be shared? Maybe Zaya or Amina might have some information about this.
So in general, everything is multifaceted, right? There are some genetic causes of disease. There are some kind of triggers, but in general, all of our health is multifactorial. So we can't sit here and say it's like all plastic's fault, right? There is certainly diet and exercise is a big portion. However, the issue is that the nutrition and the diet that we consume is inherently different than it was a generation or 2 generations ago. So it is intricately tied to what we do on a daily basis. So it is actually impossible to isolate that, it's impossible to isolate. What we do know is that at a cellular level, these very specific man-made synthetic chemicals, the effects on the human body and the different organ systems is real, right? So we know that. And one example is for, a lot of people say, oh, okay, well, if you just eat healthier, right? Well, the chemicals in plastic that are wrapped over that cucumber, right? They are endocrine disruption. They're actually changing the way your adipose cells, your fat cells react and to when they see food. So that you can't control, right? Like you might choose the cucumber or you might choose something, but you can't control the other factors. So it's really impossible to just target and study that. You can do it at a cellular level. You can do it when you look at microplastics and nanoplastics, and that's where the research needs to happen. But it's always holistic. So it's never, unless you just have to make choices that decrease your risk and do the best you can when you can. And listen, if you have to, on vacation, have some single-use plastic from time to time because it's okay. You're not a bad person and you didn't ruin your child's life, right? Like just make better choices when you can.
Yeah, and I'll also add that there are so many things in modern society that are hazardous to human health. It's not just plastic, but plastic is particularly interesting because it defies the scientific method because there is no control group for plastics. Every single human on Earth who's alive right now has plastics in their system, and that makes it harder to kind of differentiate what the health impacts are from plastic versus other hazardous materials. But luckily we have scientists, and that just goes back to the important solution of investing in research, because scientists have found a way to create controlled laboratory studies and different methods through like in vitro cell studies and human epidemiology studies to really track what the plastic specifically is doing. And we also see a lot of studies right now in animal models, and those are starting to translate into human models. But I will just emphasize that a lot of our past research is based off animal models. And as we continue to invest in our, like health research of plastic impacts, we're going to see more of the clear impacts on human health as well.
That is true. And it seems like every week, unfortunately, we're seeing more and more news and studies about the effects of plastic on our bodies, and the effects are not good. I did see a question regarding how do we expel some of the microplastics from our bodies? Is that possible? I know, Manasa, you mentioned like previously that, maybe eating differently or avoiding plastic could hopefully do that. I don't know if we have more information about that.
That's in specific some of the plastic chemicals. The research around the particles, right? The micro and the nano that study has not been, to my knowledge, studied and published with any real results on like what happens when you decrease. But for bisphenol and phthalates, these certain chemicals that are not necessarily forever chemicals, like a PFAS, for example, those have been studied to decrease in your urine when you decrease your exposure. So that's why I wanted to make sure people really understand the particles versus the chemicals. There's been a lot more research on the chemical portion. A lot of what you're hearing in the news now is the particles, the microplastics and the nanoplastics. And to Amina's point, it needs to be studied more. It needs to be isolated. And at the end of the day, the best study that you can do is a prospective randomized control, and you're not going to just expose people to harmful things and then see what happens to them, right? And so you have to do it in a controlled way. And unfortunately, our society is the experiment. This didn't happen. The reason Amina said everybody who's living today, because 2 generations ago, their bodies were inherently different than what Zaya reported in her documentary. They were just different because they didn't have that exposure.
Yes, and while we don't really know how to get microplastics out of our system, we know some of it sort of flushes its way out. There is a study that suggests that if you're boiling hard water, the calcium carbonate or the lime scale can capture some of the microplastics inside of tap water. And so that might be one very small suggestion of how to decrease your plastic load in your everyday life, is to boil that water.
Yeah, and although I did mention that there are microplastics present in bottled and tap water, like Zaya mentioned, it's really important to be able to stay hydrated and flushing out all those toxins from our body. Also, high fiber diets also help support elimination of microplastic particles. And I've also read studies that show how antioxidants from fruits and veggies and teas could also combat the oxidative stress of plastic particles.
Yes, and only adding to that, just make sure you don't use those plastic tea bags, because right there you've got 11 billion microplastic particles in every cup of tea. So yes to tea, no to plastic tea bags.
I think the thing is just do what like our great grandparents did. Like just just do that. If you can think
completely, that's what I always say too. It's not like there's no way, right? We know the way. Many of us know the way.
Yeah, even with the question about how to avoid plastic packaging in food when you have a busy lifestyle, that's why people do meal prep. I mean, that's why there's options to be able to buy in bulk and prepare for the week. And although I know that's not a viable option for everyone, and I do want to stress that we're not really advocating for individual action. This is a global problem, and it's not our fault. This is a systemic issue that was created by the plastic industry and that they should be held accountable for. So it should not just be on individuals, but there are some things we can do, and there are things that we have been doing way before plastics existed. So we should look to those as solution.
100% agree.
Thank you all for your questions. I want to ask the panelists, that was, a very important note just made, but are there any other final thoughts before we wrap up today?
Stay hopeful, stay positive, because consumer power, individual power is still something that's going to really push our policymakers and our companies to really change their behaviors. And once we're more aware of it and once we share what we know with other people, we can really try to create change at scale.
And I would add to that also just community power as well, right? There are a lot of plastic-free towns and cities. We featured one in Plastic People right here in Ontario, where I live. And it's incredible, as Margaret Mead said, what a small group of thoughtful citizens can do. So you can really create a lot of change just in the place where you live. The businesses were like 90% plastic-free, and that gave me a lot of hope as well.
And teach your kids, modeling good behavior and even just conversations with them about this, I would say when you do that, you really shape the future way better than we can. I know a lot of the educational curriculum that exists, those children go home and they will lecture their parents. And so it's such a great way to be able to converse with your children about this and empower them and educate them in the same way. So it's not just about the adults in the room. Don't forget the kids. Educate them too. They're powerful.
Thank you to our panelists, Manasa, Amina, and Zaya, for joining us today and providing so much useful information and such a rich and valuable conversation. We are not holding a webinar in May, but please mark your calendars for our next webinar on June 4th, Sea Change, Advancing a Strong UN Plastics Treaty. If you have not already, we invite you to join our global coalition. It's currently free to join as an individual, business, or nonprofit organization. And lastly, you can connect with us on social media to learn more about our work. We will also be sending out a follow-up survey after the webinar and appreciate your feedback to help us improve our future events. Thanks again to everyone for joining us today. And thanks also to our Plastic Pollution Coalition member groups and partners who shared this webinar with their communities and networks. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing all of you at our next webinar on June 4th. See you soon. Have a great day.